What is up, Formula One fans? My name is Chris,
And my name is James.
and we are the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
And we are coming to you after the conclusion of the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix, the first Chinese Grand Prix we've had since 2019. And there is a lot this weekend to get into, and I'm really excited to talk about this race. It was fantastic from start to finish from this weekend. So let's just go ahead and get into it. Overall thoughts on the weekend, being back in China and the new sprint format.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought it was great to be back in China. Clearly, my cat thought it was great too. Yeah, I thought it was a pretty good race. China always has the China.
This is going to make a great clip on TikTok.
China always has. It's usually a hit or miss. Like in 2019, we didn't have a very good race. 2018 was a banger. So I thought overall it was a pretty good race. I think as a weekend, I like this new sprint format that we have. I'm still not sold on the sprint races. I still think they're gimmicky, and we've talked about this a lot on the podcast before. I still think they're very gimmicky, but the flow of the weekend for this sprint format made it seem a lot better. And I really like the fact that drivers aren't locked into Parc Ferme for the sprint qualifying, sprint race qualifying, and the race, which has caused issues in the past with drivers being more conservative, and it kind of views the sprint race as almost as a waste. But with this format, I think it's a really, really good format. Again, I'm still not a huge fan of the sprint race, but I think if they're going to do it, I think this way they did it right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think if you're going to do something like this, I think there's still more that they could do to make it interesting. I don't think that they're ever going to go to like a F2 sprint race format where they have, they take the top 8 and reverse them. They do that specifically because it's a development series and they want to see people overtake. And I think that's the best way to get an evaluation on drivers' overtaking abilities. And I think if your sprint race performances are often the ones that people go back and look at. Look at Charles Leclerc 2017 Bahrain sprint race coming from 14th to win. You look at was it 2006 Lewis Hamilton Hungary GP2 sprint race where he came from, I think it was like second to last to win, or some way far down and he got like second or something. Those overtaking and it's specifically for teams to get a look at overtaking ability and stuff like that. I don't think F1 will ever go to something quite like that, but I think something to mix up the weekend. I think they're on the right path with, like you said, not locking the cars into Parc Ferme, and that and for the sprint qualifying and the sprint race, and you're only locked in traditionally for a Grand Prix weekend, you're only locked into qualify to Parc Ferme ahead of qualifying. So I do like that. Not a fan of sprint races, but I think, like you said, if it's going to be done, it should be done well. And I think this is done pretty well. And honestly, I think China was a really good venue for the first sprint race. Whether
I would agree.
Up a crazy sprint qualifying session with Lando Norris getting pole. And it definitely the weekend threw up some curveballs, which I think China has a tendency to do sometimes because of the weather. So all in all, I think I would say sprint weekend in China, big success. And I think as a track, there are going to be few better tracks to actually have a sprint at. I think we have another sprint weekend in Miami coming up in 2 weeks, which I think is interesting to have 2 sprint weekends back to back, but whatever. But yeah, overall, I think just really good to be back in China. And speaking of, we have to talk about the reception that Zhou Guanyu at the end of the race.
That was so heartwarming.
Yeah. You can tell not only how much he means to the Chinese fans, but you can tell how much having the support of your country behind you and being the first Chinese driver with a full-time grid seat in F1, you can tell how much that means to him. And he was very overwhelmed with the emotion. And honestly, it was so good to see. I think, he's so well liked in the paddock. He's so well liked up and down through in Formula One, and he's fun to watch. I think, is he a superstar? No. I think, are there people that could do better in that seat than him? Maybe. But I think he's a really, really good addition to the F1 grid, and you can tell that this meant a lot to him, and he means a lot to those fans.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It was really, really nice to see. It was heartwarming. It was very heartwarming, and seeing all the pictures from before the race of him going to the race in 2005 as just a little boy with a Fernando Alonso flag. And I just, gosh, it was what a cool experience for him. What a cool experience for him.
Yeah, I saw somebody post on Twitter a side-by-side picture of him with a Fernando Alonso flag at the 2005 Chinese Grand Prix and him sitting next to Fernando Alonso in the press conference. And I thought that was really, really cool. A really cool movement. But let's get on to what we are here for, which is the Grand Prix. Overall thoughts on the race, any verdicts, anything, general thoughts before we get into some specifics?
I thought it was good. I think having that qualifying in the rain, having that mix up, I think created for some good racing. I didn't think it was like a 2019 snooze fest, but I don't think it was quite on the level of the banger that we had in 2018. Yeah. It was a good race. I wouldn't say it was a great race, but it was a good one. It was a good one for sure, especially the two safety cars, having the chaos with that the two safety cars caused, and everything like that. I thought there was some really good strategy calls up and down.
Also some bad ones.
And also some bad ones. But I will say, in terms of pit strategy, it's so nice to see Ferrari actually making good strategy calls now.
Yeah.
Like, they pit Charles right when the virtual safety car happened. They pit him right when they should. It allowed him to come out ahead of, who was it? Sergio Perez. Granted, Sergio Perez ultimately got the better of him. But they pulled the trigger on that. It was great. Also with Ferrari, and we talked about this beforehand, but with Ferrari having the ability for Charles, and I think Carlos did it too, to go long, that's an indicator that they've fixed their tire wear issue.
Yeah, I think overall in general, the results for Ferrari today after doing a one stop, I think was indicative. It was very indicative that overall, not just going long on the first stint or going long in the second stint. I think they're overall being able to execute a one-stop race at a track that notoriously chews through, especially rear tires. Mm-hmm. Their ability to do that, maintain pace, and get the performance out of the car that they did all the way through in all phases of the Grand Prix, I think we can officially put the stamp of approval on their tire wear problems. I think they've sorted it out. We will go a little bit further in depth on Ferrari, but I just want to talk a little bit about the safety car because it did throw up some interesting strategy. But I actually don't think that the safety car, the first safety car, and then the subsequent safety car that came after the lap one or the restart incident between Magnussen and Tsunoda, which we'll get on to later. I think that came right at the transition of the stints. It came at the very end of the stint for a two-stop race, and it came at the very beginning of the stint for a one-stop strategy. So I don't think it had too much of an impact. I think the biggest impact that it had was on Fernando Alonso because Aston Martin messed that strategy up for him. And ultimately it didn't really, the gaps were spread out enough that you could, during the virtual safety car or at the beginning of when the safety car was actually deployed, you could make those pit stops, and it worked. And I think it put everybody effectively onto a one-stop strategy. The only other person that was not on a one-stop strategy was Daniel Ricciardo. He had pitted once again for mediums, so he was going to have to pit again. But ultimately, we didn't get to see how that was going to play out. But in general, and I think this is specifically with Ferrari too, I think, yeah, the safety car, they gave them a couple laps to save the tires, but I honestly don't think that not having that safety car would have taken away their tire wear advantage compared to especially Mercedes behind them, George and Oscar behind them. I don't think that it would have taken away from the advantage over those two drivers. I think they still would have finished ahead of Fernando Alonso. So maybe not Fernando. I don't know. I think the safety car really messed with his strategy because they put him on softs, which meant he had to pit again because they were not going to make it to the end. So I think, but I don't think that had an outcome on Ferrari's race to me. And I think that to me tells me that they've gotten on top of their tire wear issue. But I also wonder if they've gone too much. We talk about the balance between qualifying and race, one lap pace versus race pace. And this is something that I think Red Bull has done really well. They have enough qualifying pace in their car to be very consistent and to constantly fight for poles. But I think they have prioritized the race, obviously, considering, there are some times where I don't know if they're going to get pole. Is somebody going to disrupt a Red Bull pole position? And sometimes we don't know if they're going to get pole until Q3. And then all of a sudden in the race, they're miles ahead of everybody else and just absolutely, completely, crushingly dominate.
Yeah.
But they have enough performance in that car that they do well. I think Ferrari has always prioritized one lap pace, which is why they do so well in qualifying and can't maintain it during the race. And I think they've gone a little bit too far in the other direction now, where their race pace and their tire wear and everything is really, really good. But I think it's come at too much of a cost in qualifying, because the past two races we've seen in Japan and China, I think they qualify weaker than they are expected to, and that leaves them with a little bit too much to do in the race.
Yeah, because race pace, focusing on race pace is great, and having good race pace is awesome. But if you're setting yourself up where you're qualifying, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and you have to make all of those positions up, by the time that you're able to get up to the podium position, you're already a pit stop behind.
Yeah.
So it's, I think the coin was on one side last year, and now it's flipped to the other side, and they still are facing the same issues. So it's a really fine balance that you have to get in, and teams like Red Bull have nailed it. McLaren also, they're able to qualify well. They're able to have good race pace and all that stuff. But Ferrari is kind of not be able to qualify very well, and that leaves them a lot of room to work in the race.
Well, and let's talk about McLaren for a second, because I think this is a track that I wasn't sure was going to suit them, and they were definitely faster than Ferrari this weekend. I think
surprised a lot of us. Lando Norris passed Sergio Perez on track, on merit, pure pace.
I think Lando's performance, yes, is due to, obviously, McLaren was quicker, but we have to give props to Lando Norris, because the McLaren is not a Red Bull beater.
Oh, yeah.
And he just drove out of his mind today. He did all the right things. He managed the race perfectly. But I do think that the McLaren was faster than Ferrari this weekend. I think they were faster than Ferrari in Japan. I think they're going to, I'm not really sure what Miami is going to look like, because it has the long straights, it has the high speed corners where McLaren has been doing really well, but it also has the low speed corners where Ferrari is probably even faster than Red Bull in that third sector. So I don't really know what Miami is going to be. I think Imola and Monaco are going to be Ferrari's races to win. And I think McLaren are going to struggle. And we saw that. And I say that because of what we saw in Australia. Australia is very similar to Imola. Imola I think Imola and Hungary are the two closest tracks that you're going to get to in terms of a street circuit like Monaco. So I think it'll be interesting to see, so that tells me that McLaren is not faster than Ferrari over the course of a season. And I think it's going to change track specific on who's faster. But I think it is indicative that McLaren is a lot closer to Ferrari than I think we were able to get an idea of after Bahrain and Jeddah. I think everybody thought it was Red Bull, yes, Ferrari emphatically second, and then it was going to be like McLaren, Mercedes, Aston Martin, kind of in this 3-car group. And I think, and now I think McLaren is up to where Ferrari is, and I don't think that has really anything to do with any upgrades or anything. I think that's just they're this weekend allowed them to get closer to their potential. And I think they are a lot closer to Ferrari than a lot of people thought at the beginning of the season.
Yeah. I totally agree with that assessment. It was a really, really good weekend for McLaren. They have a lot to be happy about this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Red Bull obviously have a lot to be happy about. I think they would have loved Sergio Perez to be closer to Max Verstappen. And I think we're just seeing where Sergio Perez's ceiling is. He can get close, but not close enough, I think, to really have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be any driver that goes up against Max, or that is partnered with Max.
So. But I think him getting third was more indicative of just Lando's performance this weekend. I think Lando earned that second place. Clearly he got pole for the sprint race. I think some things in the sprint race let him down a little bit, and he wasn't able to capitalize on that. But he had pace in that McLaren. I don't think he had as much pace as Oscar Piastri. I don't think Oscar Piastri, he had a little bit of damage because of the pileup caused by Lance Stroll, but so he was not really able to impact the end of the race. But I don't think Oscar Piastri was going to finish ahead of the Ferraris, regardless if he had a fully functioning car. But yeah, Lando Norris just driving out of his mind this weekend. On the other side of good performances, we have to talk about some poor performances, which means we have to talk about Mercedes and specifically Lewis Hamilton. And
yeah,
this has nothing to do with Lewis Hamilton's skill behind the wheel. And honestly, I have no idea what is going on with that car. I don't know if he's experimenting with setups like he did at the beginning of last season. I don't know what it is, but there's something that George Russell is able to find in that car that Lewis is just not. And I think I can already start to tell that Lewis is just kind of like, all right, I'm ready to be at Ferrari. Like,
yeah.
Of course, obviously we're not inside his head, but the way that he's been talking, the not necessarily the things that he says, some of the things that he says, but just his overall attitude, I think, about a lot of things right now is just like, I'm done with dealing with this. And,
I don't blame him. I don't blame him one bit. He's, a 7-time world champion, and Mercedes for years has been dominating, and no one's been able to figure out how to beat him. And then all of a sudden, now that Red Bull's beating them, they can't design a car. They've completely got these new regulation changes all wrong. And like Lewis is like, what the heck? We looked like the biggest bunch of geniuses on the grid, and now we in the words of Gunther Steiner, we looked like rock stars, and now we look like a bunch of wankers.
Yeah,
it's really, really sad to see, and I don't blame Lewis for being frustrated and kind of having that attitude. I would feel the same way if I were in his shoes.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what George Russell is finding in that car that Lewis just wasn't able to find this weekend, and I don't know if I have an answer. I think that just, George Russell was in a bad car for so long, so he's used to poor handling cars. I think that's maybe, but I think that's a little reductionist. I think there's definitely some other things going on. Maybe there's some experimenting with setups. I think there's something else going on. I don't know if it's this Lewis's distrust of the leadership of that team. With some of his engineers or the people at the team. I don't know if I couldn't tell you. I don't know what's going on. Obviously we're not on the ground, we're not inside the team, but there's something there that is just not clicking for Lewis and Mercedes as a combination, which is really hard to watch because he's been so good and so successful with that team for so long.
I wonder if during during their time of dominance, because of the regulations, they were able to kind of build that car around Lewis. Now, I'm not saying that they're not building it around Lewis now and they're building it around George, but I wonder if with these new regulation changes, Lewis has a very, very kind of like Daniel Ricciardo has a very, very particular way of driving. And I wonder this new design of the car, the new regulations, they're not able to get the car quite to where Lewis wants it. And so therefore he's not really able to drive it. So they're having to experiment with all these different setups to try and get it to work.
I don't know. I think I'm not sure what.
That's just a thought.
I don't know how specifically that pertains to Lewis Hamilton, but I think that is an interesting thought given the example of Sebastian Vettel and his transition from blown diffuser V8s to turbo hybrid V6s.
Mm-hmm.
He was unstoppable with blown diffuser V8s.
Oh yeah.
And you took the aero advantage from a blown diffuser away, the rear end aero advantage of the blown diffuser V8 away from Sebastian Vettel, and it took him until really 2017 to really get on top of that. We now know that's because Ferrari was cheating with their power unit, but that is a whole other conversation for a whole other different podcast episode. But so it is an interesting thought. I don't really know what the answer is. I think George Russell's performance today was the maximum that Mercedes was going to get. So I don't
what, sixth, fifth?
I believe he was sixth. But I think that was all that they were going to get for Mercedes. I think that's all he was going to get out of that Mercedes. And I think the Mercedes performance is just really confusing to me.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, Lewis Hamilton was knocked out of Q1.
Yeah. So, and then on the other hand, with poor performances, and the team that I think I feel really bad for is the RBs. I feel so bad for them. They were doing really well. Yuki Tsunoda was on a really, really good strategy, and I think had a shot for points today.
Daniel Ricciardo was running up in ninth.
Well, yeah. Yuki Tsunoda was running up towards the points, and I think had a shot for points when he was taken out by Kevin Magnussen, and Daniel was running in the points when he was ran into by Lance Stroll, which resulted in floor damage for both of them, massive floor damage for Daniel Ricciardo, and then a puncture that I think, just wasn't able to get the car going after he stopped for Yuki Tsunoda. So that's a weekend that they forget. And it's unfortunate that it is. And this kind of leads into our next point with the two drivers that caused these incidents, but their retirements were caused completely by people, that they had nothing control over. It was other people's mistakes that resulted in both of their retirements. And I think that is just the bitterest pill to swallow. If the power unit fails or somebody crashes, it's a crash on their own. That's one thing. But when it's the result of Nimrods being Nimrods and completely out of your control, it's hard to take. And speaking of, this is two very high-profile incidences for Lance Stroll and Kevin Magnussen. Let's talk about both of them, but let's talk about the Kevin Magnussen one first. Just out of the corner, I don't know where he was going. Yuki Tsunoda was in front of him, so he was clearly able to see Yuki Tsunoda. Just completely got into the right rear of Yuki Tsunoda
and turned him
around. It resulted in a puncture for both drivers, ruined their races. Obviously, Yuki Tsunoda ended up out. Kevin Magnussen ended up with a front left puncture. That was just nothing but boneheadedness.
Oh yeah, it 100% was. It was a dumb mistake. That was a dumb mistake on Kevin Magnussen's part.
Yeah,
and he's been. When you compare him, Nico Hulkenberg has been driving that Haas lights out this year. That Haas car isn't great, but Nico Hulkenberg has been doing really well so far this season, and Kevin Magnussen has not been up to where Nico Hulkenberg is. And today was a really big indicator of that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think and this performance by Kevin Magnussen is kind of making me realize that I am willing to bet. If I'm a betting man, I don't think Kevin Magnussen is going to be at Haas next year. Hulkenberg has completely outperformed him so far this season. Hulkenberg has actually he's been known for being really rather inconsistent, but he's, I think, been the most consistent part about Haas this season so far.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's mostly scoring the points for Haas. He's putting Haas in a good point scoring position pretty much every time he steps into that car.
Yep.
And I think he's getting the maximum out of that car much more than Kevin Magnussen is. And I think this mistake by Kevin Magnussen just highlights the issues that this team has with him. And I think if I'm a betting man, he's going to end up not only not in Formula One, but at this point, if I'm Ayo Komatsu, I'm already starting to talk to Ollie Behrman about, hey, we're looking at you, no pressure. Let's get your F2, let's get your F2 campaign going, let's get you those super license points, because if you get those super license points, we're putting you in the car. If I'm Ayo Komatsu, I'm really thinking about having that conversation with Ollie Behrman.
He's already had a great race in a Formula One car. So yeah. I definitely think that would be a good a good choice for Haas. We got to talk about the other bonehead move, or the other bonehead, Lance Stroll running right into the back of Daniel Ricciardo, completely ruining Daniel Ricciardo's race, so much so that he had to retire the car. And this is just another issue that Lance Stroll has had. And yeah. I so wish, and it sucks that I think there's so many people that would deserve to partner Fernando Alonso, but Lance Stroll is just never going to leave the team until his dad no longer is the owner.
Yeah, and
daddy's money.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it is really unfortunate because he's leaving so much to be desired with that team. And I think that it's just, God, what a move. And so Oscar Piastri summed it up best. So Lance Stroll, after that happened, Lance Stroll was basically like, oh, well, he just stopped in front of me. Like, it was a pileup, it wasn't my fault. Oscar Piastri said it best. And that was put to Oscar Piastri because Daniel Ricciardo ran into Oscar Piastri, gave him floor damage, basically ruined the race, like ruined his diffuser. So it was put to Oscar Piastri. And it was like, basically like, this is what Lance Stroll is saying. Like, everybody stopped in front of him, and Oscar Piastri was like, yeah, that happened, but nobody else crashed into each other. And then Daniel Ricciardo, who obviously,
also, why didn't he just like turn to get out of the?
Yeah. So, well, also very obviously, like Daniel Ricciardo was asked after, like he was talking about it, very obviously very frustrated and deservedly very frustrated about the situation. And he pointed out the fact that if you go back and look at Lance Stroll's onboard, he was looking at the apex. He was not looking in front of him. He was looking at the apex when Daniel Ricciardo was braking. And so he wasn't even paying attention to what was happening in front of him. So I think it's a very well-deserved penalty. And I think Lance Stroll worsens his case and makes him look even more like an idiot by saying it wasn't his fault, because it very clearly, he was not paying attention to what was happening in front of him. He was looking at something that you don't need to look at when you're in a safety car and you're only going, 90 something kilometers an hour through a corner. If that, you don't need to be looking over at that stuff. You don't why are you?
Especially the corner that it happened. It was such a slow corner and they were under safety car.
Right. Exactly.
Like they were probably going at like just a normal road car speed driving through a subdivision.
Yeah.
That's probably how fast that they were going.
Yeah. It was like, what? So the penalty that he got was obviously very well deserved, and Daniel Ricciardo has every right to be as frustrated as he was. Especially, we have to talk about Daniel Ricciardo because he had the measure of Yuki Tsunoda. He outqualified Yuki Tsunoda, and he was ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in pretty much every phase of the Grand Prix.
And that was the first time that we've seen that all season long.
Exactly. And I think, I was just starting to believe that we're starting to get glimmers of the old Daniel Ricciardo. Is he starting to finally get to Yuki Tsunoda? Is he finally starting to figure out this whole F1 thing again that he really hasn't figured out since he went to McLaren in 2021? And I had such hopes. I was like, man, he has a shot at points. He was running in the points when it happened. He was doing such a good job. And now my question is, because I think he was using a new chassis this weekend. How much of that was caused by actually having a chassis that, maybe potentially is not broken? Or if he's just, unlocking another level of performance, or if this was just a track that suits him really well. It clearly is a track that he goes well at, given his 2018 performance at the track. But yeah, just it completely of all people to ruin a race for, Daniel Ricciardo's race is the last person that you wanted to ruin a race for, because he was doing so well. And I wanted to see Daniel Ricciardo finish, because I want to be able to evaluate him more accurately. But
Yeah.
he looked like he was doing really well. And I don't think it's because Yuki Tsunoda was having a poor weekend at all either. I think he was having a great weekend too. So I just incredibly unlucky for that team.
Yeah, it really was very unlucky for them, because they both, and you said it before, but having a good race ruined by another driver is just one of the most frustrating things that I think you can experience in this world. Like they were doing really well. It was like the best running that the team as a whole had been having all season long, and they both got taken out by complete boneheads.
And I think they don't have any points right now. And I think this was realistically their first shot at points for the season, which probably wouldn't have changed the drivers' championship standings at all. But I think they had a huge opportunity to do this, to score points. So the results I don't think would have changed in the drivers or in the constructors championship. But what did change in the constructors championship is now, because of Valtteri Bottas's retirement, and I think we are starting to see a little bit of progress with Alpine. Alpine is no longer 10th in the constructors championship.
Yeah, which
Albert
is
10th. And so again, I think that's because, Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon had a strong weekend. I think Alpine is starting to get its stuff together. And I think they're starting to operate on a better level. I think, some early season upgrades are coming in, and I think hopefully helping. And I think they're getting themselves back on the right path. But ultimately, I think Valtteri Bottas's retirement did not do Sauber any favors. And I think ultimately that's something that let them down this weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree.
So any final thoughts on China before we look ahead to Miami?
I do have one thing, and and it's kind of not necessarily related to the Chinese Grand Prix, but I sent you the picture.
Yes.
So during the Chinese Grand Prix weekend, Helmut Marko made this comment, because a lot of the topics of discussion that we've been seeing about, like, where are some of the drivers going to go to next year. So obviously one of the hottest drivers on the market is Carlos Sainz.
Yep.
Everyone's wondering about where Carlos Sainz is going to go. Now, this doesn't really apply to next year, but Helmut Marko made this comment. He has, because I think a lot of people are like, well, is he going to go to Red Bull? And Helmut Marko made this comment. He has a very lucrative offer from Audi that we cannot match or beat. So we talked about in a previous episode that we think next year he's going to go to, actually, it was the very last episode that we did. No, well, not the last episode, before the Chinese Grand Preview. During the off weekend, we said that, or I can't remember if it was you or me, I think it was me, said that he was going to go to Stake next year, Sauber, that's where he was going to go, because they're going to be bought by Audi in 2026. So this basically all but confirms that he's going to be going to Audi in 2026. which means he's probably going to be going to stake next year.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And again, I think if you're Carlos Sainz, if the deal is as lucrative as they say it's going to be, and it probably has a lot of incentives, and he's going to be very involved in the direction that team is going to be going in, and very involved in getting Audi off the ground. So I think that overall is just a much more enticing. You are starting further back in the grid, and that's just always going to be the case when you're taking over a back marker. But when you have the backing of Audi, a car company that has had a lot of success in motorsports, I mean, you just look at their endurance pedigree, in the early 2000s. They know their way around motorsport, and I think if I'm looking at potentially just being Max Verstappen's backup, or you have the potential to be an Audi legend by getting that team off the ground. And, you're a founding member of that F1 team, as it is with Audi, because obviously it's not, it's taking over. So he's not a founding member clearly, but you are the start of the Audi project. I think that looks way more enticing to Carlos Sainz. And the other thing that does is I think it really locks Red Bull into Sergio Perez. Because I at this point, I don't, if I'm Red Bull, I'm not putting either Yuki Tsunoda or Daniel Ricciardo in that car. And so you're just I think Red Bull is in a situation now where they kind of have to put all of their eggs in the Sergio Perez basket and hope it pans out.
Yeah. You know what else kind of blows my mind about that? The fact that Red Bull can't match or beat that deal. Red Bull is one of the wealthiest brands just in general on planet Earth. They're the most recognizable. I think they're one of the most wealthy and well-known brands. And the fact that they cannot offer a big enough contract for Carlos to beat that is pretty mind-blowing to me, that they can't do that. It also says a lot about Audi, because you're right. They have the motorsport pedigree, and they are, up there among the top of the car brands when it comes to motorsport pedigree as a whole. Ferrari's up there. Mercedes is up there with their different racing leagues that they compete in. Audi. So they're definitely up there. So I believe that this Audi project is going to be really good. And you're absolutely right. Carlos Sainz has probably one of the coolest opportunities in F1 right now.
Yeah. Well, and part of me is also wondering if that has everything to do with just how big Max Verstappen's contract is,
That's
because,
true.
They're not willing with the amount of money that they're putting into other things. They're probably not willing to put too much more money into, not that there's a salary cap for drivers, but, I think just given the way that the budget is shaking out, I think they can get away with giving Sergio Perez a little bit lower of a contract. And I think what Carlos Sainz has done for himself, and the way that he's acquitted himself over the past, so far this season and last season, I think, his market value has gone way up. I always thought that it should be higher than it was.
Oh yeah. He was one of the most underrated drivers up until he joined Ferrari.
His market value has gone way up this season. And I just think that that's something that Red Bull is just not in a price bracket. And I think that has to do with how much they're paying Max Verstappen. So I think that also locks in Sergio Perez. There was a lot of talk over the weekend too about, Max Verstappen going to Mercedes. A lot of that has been boiling in the background, and is just a lot of that has come up because of the power struggle that's going on between Red Bull's owners and everything that's gone on with Christian Horner. That seems to have died down, at least for now. And honestly, right now, given how Mercedes is performing and how Red Bull is performing, I don't see Max Verstappen going anywhere. And so I think a lot of those Max Verstappen rumors are that they're rumors. I don't think he's going really anywhere. He will be a really interesting linchpin if something were to happen, and if he were to decide to exercise his break clause from his contract. But at the moment, I think it would be really stupid for Max Verstappen to go somewhere else. Red Bull is performing so well and Mercedes is performing relatively compared to Red Bull so poorly that it's just not even worth entertaining that thought. And then Christian Horner kind of came back and was like, yeah, well, George Russell, was saying all this stuff about George Russell to kind of call Toto Wolff's bluff about everything. And I think it's just political. I think Max Verstappen's seat in Formula One, I think, is just political gamesmanship from Toto and Christian. I don't think anything's going to come of it. And honestly, I think Red Bull right now, Sergio Perez is doing enough to keep his seat.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Daniel Ricciardo or Yuki Tsunoda are not doing well enough to be promoted. I will say, I think that Liam Lawson will be an RB next year. I don't know who his teammate will be, but he will likely be in F1 next year. He will be an RB next year. I don't know who it's going to be. And I think that's what Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda are fighting for. Based on early season performance, I would put him up against Yuki Tsunoda and drop Daniel Ricciardo. But Daniel Ricciardo had a really good weekend this weekend that unfortunately was ended early. So I don't know.
The season is long.
And it is very long. But yeah, I think the driver market thought was going to be way bigger, with Fernando Alonso announcing that he was staying at Aston Martin and Carlos Sainz likely off to Audi next year. I don't think that there's going to be much more movement.
Silly season's not as silly as we thought the silly season would be.
But of course, we all said that, and then before Lewis Hamilton announced he was going to Ferrari, so
that is true.
We all thought that silly season wasn't going to be so silly, and then Lewis Hamilton was like, "Peace out, Mercedes." So You never truly know. Last thing that I want to do, get a little bit look ahead at Miami. It's a track that we're going to, I think, for what, the third time. I don't know. Another race in Miami. The track.
Yeah, 2022, 2023, and 2024.
I actually truly have no idea who is going to do well here. I think obviously Red Bull's won every single race there so far. I don't see them stopping. I don't think that this is going to be a race that, I think it'll be a toss up between, Ferrari and McLaren. I think it's going to be another really big struggle for Mercedes, but I think more so because of the heat. It's going to be hot in Miami. It always is hot in Miami. You're starting to get into monsoon season down there, and it's going to be hot. It's going to be humid. There's always a chance of rain. And I think that
which could make it fun.
It could make it fun, but I think
the past couple races have not been very good there.
The heat is something that Mercedes has struggled with in the past, that they continue to struggle with this year. So I think it's going to be a tough race for Mercedes. With Ferrari and McLaren, I don't know. Their strengths and weaknesses are opposite each other, and you see both at this track. You see the high speed corners, you see the low speed, high downforce sections. It reminds me a lot of Russia in a way, where you have a lot of high speed corners, but that third sector at Russia was always kind of like, do you prioritize sector 1 and 2, or do you prioritize sector 3? And I think this is very similar in Miami. So I really don't know what's going to happen, and I think it's all going to depend on who prioritizes what, and it's another sprint weekend.
Yeah. So a lot can happen. Really, really excited for that. But in the meantime, we will see you again next weekend, and then we'll see you again after Miami. Be sure to follow us on all of our social medias, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Be sure to like and subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And we'll catch you after the next episode.